So this is the CI/CD UX meeting for August 11th. My goodness. Couple of FYI items. Have a look. So I'm going to jump to the announcements. If you haven't answered to this survey yet about merge request design reviews, please do so. Pedro needs your feedback by the end of this week, August 13th. Comparative evaluation feedback as well. Nadia, I saw that this one is assigned to you because you took part of, or at least you conducted a comparative evaluation last quarter. But anyone really that has seen the process or that has that was curious about it, that think it could have had any improvements, please leave your feedback in this issue here so that we can make decisions about the future of comparator evaluations. And we have a Q3 team building event for the UX department. Maybe you've seen in your inboxes some placeholder events. Check your calendars. It's going to happen in 31st of August and 1st of September, trying to be inclusive of all time zones. So there's multiple events like last quarter. And this time it's going to involve an activity using the Q3 budget. So UX leadership work with the learning and development folks to pick an activity, still pending, but it's going to use the $50 that the company assigned to each employee. So please note that you can only use this budget for the UX department event, right? So if your team buildings, if your teams, stage groups are organizing something, you're welcome to participate, of course, but just make sure that they are not accounting for that budget for you. So ask. And any questions, yeah, just let me know, and I'll ask around as well to see what's needed, what's necessary. And my last announcement, 14.2 UX retrospective is here. Feels like it doesn't feel like it's been a month, but just a heads up, it's there. Feedback and input is welcome. So I'll pause now. Maybe someone has a question or comment on this announcement. All right. If not, then let's talk about UX debt. So I was going over the UX debt list for CI/CD, and I wanted to just touch base on you, see if there are any questions about what UX debt is, how should we use it, or when should we create a UX debt issue? Mostly because when we have these issues that are not actually classified as UX debt, that impacts the performance indicators, right? So it shows that we have too many open issues, etc. I add a couple of examples here of what is UX debt and what is not. So in the first example, oops, let's see. You can see an issue that it's not a UX debt because mainly it's a proposal of how to improve the feature. So UX debt it's mainly something that was supposed to be delivered as part of the MVC, that was part of the agreed scope of the proposal, but it's also a UX related change of feature, anyways, a thing that relates to the design system. So usage of the components, of the pajamas guidelines, anyways, anything that is really related to the scope of our design system. And in the second link, you can see an example of UX debt that is, you can see that the discussion or the proposal refers to a discussion that happened in a merge request, right? That had a source of truth that came from the MVC and that was created by front end and designer as part of the build stage, right? In the merge request, when they decided we're not going to deliver this specific thing related to empty states because, and then it's a UX debt. So quick overview. I also linked here some references, but I kind of want to hear from you if there's any questions about what is UX debt, what is not, but also want to know how are you identifying UX debt in your workflow today, and if you see any opportunities for us to improve that together with your dev teams. So I'll pause now. I see a lot of comments. So I think Vitika, you have the first, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a not very common case, but it has been happening. So I know of two instances. The first one I couldn't find a link for, but for the second one I've put the link here. So what happened for this was that in pipeline execution, we were trying to optimize the space which is there in the pipeline index page, which was a problem in itself. And so we made this decision that we would be putting a kebab menu in as one of the action items, so that all the additional actions which are not primary in nature, they could just go onto that. And that also came in very handy for us when we faced a problem where earlier what used to happen was the whole page, the artifacts for the entire page, it was kind of queried at the same time when the page was being loaded. And that used to cause a lot of delay in the loading time. So to reduce that, we placed the download artifacts item inside the kebab menu. So unless you go and click on the kebab menu, it's not going to query for the download for the artifacts that could be downloaded. So that saved us some performance problems. Now, I think this is from the testing side now, that for the pipeline index page, I was there to propose a solution, but this also had to be replicated on the MR widget. And this was mostly in the area of testing. So they came up with this, I mean, you have seen this in the chats, right? That they provided this option to place an empty state in the download artifact button, that the button would still be active, it would still be visible, just that you'll see an empty state if it is not there. So it's their approach, but in such situation, what this is doing is it's kind of going against the solution that I've proposed. Like those are conflicting now, even though they are very closely related, just because two different teams are taking care of it. I wanted to know if this kind of qualifies as a UX step, because for my earlier proposal, this is a deviation from that, but I'm not from the other team. So
this is almost like a bug, but also a change to, how do you call it, like a rollback to incorrect state, right? I think the nuance for UX depth, and what I understand, right, from this problem is that the UX depth is when we consciously generate a gap. You understand? So this could be, for example, classified as a bug, right? That someone did something wrong, and not something wrong, sorry, folks, that a change affected a specific part of the UI. And it could also be, for example, a UI polish. Is it only related to, the drop down where something is incorrect there? I would say UI polish only covers visual improvements or visual changes to the existing interface. And the depth is really result from the intentional decision to deviate from that design solution. So I would a bit tough to make that decision on the spot without like looking at everything that happened. Right. But this could also be regression. So we have a regression label. We don't use that as much, but it's a bug that introduced a change to that specific part of the product, and we use that for UX as well. So here in this link, we explain how to use the regression label. So I think in this case, it could be something that is not UX depth, it's not UI polish, but yeah, it's a change that was introduced. Does that make sense? If I understood correctly?
Yeah, that does make sense. So it definitely doesn't qualify as a debt, because this was not an intentional deviation. It just happened in the process.
Exactly.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Daniel, I think now I only see the initials, and so my brain has to work a little bit. You're muted.
There you go. Zoom just also warned me. So I read Vijika's description, and I really like the first part of it. When the implementation doesn't match the most recent proposal, I think it fits really well with the definition of the depth, as we decided to have this depth. But then at the same time, how do we differentiate the depth from parts we break down for iteration for later on?
That's a good question. So the depth is usually generated when we are, so let me go back here to the description. That's something that sacrifices also the user experience, right? My experience creating UX depth, and I've seen other designers doing differently, is that I will identify something as a depth if we consciously decided not to build it as part of a merge request discussion. That's how I usually do. Because if I know ahead of time that we're not going to implement something, then it's a feature enhancement, right? So if we say that we're not going to do pagination on this list because first we are going to show only, I don't know, 10 items at a time, right? We don't need a whatever pagination component. It's not a depth, right? It's just an iteration on the initial MVC. But can you give an example, Daniel? Maybe it would be best if we could understand the nuance.
Yes, so
that.
I was writing it down here, but I'll just share my screen. It's the example that you pointed out last week. So, if you can see it already. So essentially what this example means is when you have an environment with a broken URL, let's say like you forgot .com at the end. So it's an invalid URL. Or in the case of environments, any URL that is not HTTPS is considered invalid. So in that case, if you click the view deployment button that takes you to the URL, it would be broken. So what the system does today is it just hides the button, right? And then I added the UX depth here, and Hyan asked me to remove it. And the reason why I was a bit confused is because I don't have the historical context of why this decision was taken, right? So did we consciously decide to have this as something that we will do later? Or is this a bug in the code that is based on the developer, they should be showing this, but there's a bug, or the developer chose to implement this behavior like this in a way that doesn't inform the user properly. In my view, a disabled button would work well here. It's a small fix, but then I don't know if it's a matter of a technical bug, a past decision that we consider that, or a past decision that we, at the time, we consider to be the right behavior, and maybe it's not anymore. So I feel like from the user perspective, if it's a conscious decision from us or not, doesn't really matter for them. If they see something as a usability problem, they will see it as a usability problem, and that's fine. But then from my own perspective, just joining, I'm not sure which of these parts were active decisions and which were not. So it makes it a bit harder to classify. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks for the example. I think you really touched on a very interesting point, right? Like it makes no difference to the user, but that's okay because we use UX depth as part of how we track our the gaps and as a performance indicator as well. Like, are we shipping things that include a gap in the user experience? Are we shipping things that are incomplete? Are we shipping things that are not non-pajamas compliant? So I think that's also a good way of thinking of what UX depth actually is, but also if that problem did not originate from like a merge request, right? Or you don't know where that comes from, I would assume that it's not a UX depth because then I don't know for sure, right? So it can be a feature enhancement in this case. It can be, especially if you say, there's an error, right? There's something wrong happening here, not only with the experience, but also with the workflow, with how the user, I don't know, goes to that deployment page, etc. I wouldn't consider this one UX depth because I don't know if there was a discussion and that was a conscious decision, right? So that already, it doesn't fit in the description of that. So it's tough because we don't have that historical context. So I would assume, label things that where are they coming from. And you can usually find that, for example, if in the issue description, if it's old, there is a mention to a merge request, right? Or if people are discussing in the comments. So that's why I go once a month and I go over everything and I read the issue descriptions and I see if there are comments and discussions to understand if something is a debt. Does that make sense, Daniel?
It does make sense, yeah. For me, one of the biggest points of contention is going to a page and seeing like a very clear usability problem, and then immediately thinking, oh, it's a usability problem, so it's a UX problem, so it's something we should fix, so it's a UX debt. Like I automatically make the logical leap. But yeah, I think separating UX depth from like a problem in the interface and seeing it more as an internal process is what makes most sense to properly apply the label, at least for me.
Yeah. And again, let's go back to thinking it's intentional, right? Do we know if
Yeah.
that choice was intentional or not? Then I think it's easier to decide when to apply the UX depth label. But that was a good example. Yeah.
I think this is a really good discussion, and we could tweak a little bit the definition on the handbook to make it more clear. Because I think just reading the definition of UX depth as it is right now, it bakes in a lot of assumptions. So it leaves a lot of space for these small misunderstandings. I can open an MR to suggest a couple of changes and then tag you all, and then we see what makes sense to add or change there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, check the definition, this one that I linked here. Which one? Here, because we have in the engineering, we have in the UX label and in the performance indicator, but this is the source of truth, this one here. Yeah, so feel free to open an MR. Yeah, assign it to me, and then we'll discuss.
So my point is related to the definition, because I've been finding it confusing since the beginning of time. So it says, sometimes there's an intentional decision to deviate from the agreed upon MVC, which sacrifices the user experience. What if there's no agreed upon MVC and it's just like a contribution made by one engineer, and there hasn't really been discussions about exactly what the proposal is, and UX hasn't created a specific proposal? So is that a UX depth? If it has discrepancies in terms of user experience?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's why it's so important, right, that we are in the merge request review phase, so that we can spot these inconsistencies. So let's assume, and that happened many times before, engineer or person from the community opens a merge request changing something that impacts the UI. But for example, that person did not add an empty state, right? So our jobs and what we have to do is to be there to understand that context and say, hey, you've missed XYZ requirement that aligns with what our design system is saying, or that what our UI guidelines are saying, et cetera, et cetera. And then if we make a conscious decision to not increase the scope of that merge request, we should create the UX depth as a follow-up, right? Based on the discussions that are on the thread. So there will be times indeed where we will not going to have a source of truth for the design proposal, but we know how things should work. We know how things should look like in regards to what Pajamas is dictating. So that's when we generate that. But again, what's hazing here in the handbook is that, where it's at the end, in case the team makes a decision to ship an MVC that contains an UX depth, it's recommended to create an issue to track it as soon as the change has been released. Mm-hmm. So I'll give an example of how it happens in package, and I've seen them doing that very well, that when there are discussions about something, whatever, empty state is missing, they immediately open a follow-up issue, they merge the merge request, and they start working on that follow-up. So I think it's also important to keep that in mind, because indeed the reference, right, the source of truth sometimes is not going to be provided by us as part of the initial context of the merge request. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So to recap, UX depth, it's intentional. It deviates from either an MVC, from the UX vision. I think that's also, maybe that's what we say in the handbook, that it's not really kind of like what Nadia said now, is the UX vision. Maybe you can say that it's related to the UX guidelines, right? That sacrifice user experience, intentional. addresses a gap, right? If we don't know where it comes from, then we cannot assume it's a UX debt. And if we generate that debt, we should be tracking it soon, and we should be, well, in a way, pushing for the implementation of this debt, so we don't leave these things hanging, because usually they are minimal. When I look at the UX debt lists, they are, yeah, here's a typo, here's an empty stamp missing, here's an ellipsis that's not working, and those are the ugly things, you know, in the user experience. So maybe any final comments or questions on this topic before I move forward? Well, then, thanks for the chat. It's nice that we could discuss this a little bit. Awesome. Then over to Daniel.
Yeah, so quick update. Yeah, working on closing the design side of 14.3 planning. There's this quick comment right down there, but essentially a lot of the issues that were planned for this milestone were blocked by the problem validation, which is almost running, still not running. So yeah, basically the bigger effort to redesign the environments page was blocked by the problem validation, and a lot of smaller issues were blocked by that. So I'm aligning with my PM and our EM and trying to unblock whatever smaller issue that can be worked in parallel with that. So it was a nice exercise in transparency and delivering bad news in a way. But it was well received by the team. So still need to check up with them. And then, yeah, the big thing is the survey on the environments page. There were still a few comments left while I was out of office. So need to check up on those and see if we can merge that today, ideally. So yeah, that's me for now.
Oh, it's me now. Yeah, so I started looking into improving the CI/CD empty states. Let me share my screen and I will quickly kind of give you some context around the problem that I see. So currently we have several different pages under CI/CD. So even if you don't have CI/CD set up, you see all of these links in the navigation, except for the artifacts. I think it doesn't show up. And actually, I haven't seen artifacts here, and I only noticed it today. So I was wondering if it's something new, or we've always had it and I just never noticed it. I don't know. But anyway, when you don't have CI/CD set up, you don't have artifacts here, but you have all of these different pages, and all of them have different empty states. So if you click on CI/CD, the parent item, or the pipelines page, we show this empty state, which is the templates empty state. And among all of the different empty states that we have for the CI/CD pages, this offers the best onboarding experience because it provides you with some information around like what you're supposed to do, that, hey, you're supposed to use a file and there is such thing as GitLab CI YAML file. So it kind of prepares you for what's going to happen. It gives you an idea that you will need to edit some file to set up CI/CD. And then you're able to either get started with a basic template that has like some scripts that just like echo scripts that don't actually run anything, but it allows you to see how pipelines work and what is a job and things like that. Or you can select an actual template based on your framework. Then for the editor, we have another empty state, which looks like this. Optimize your workflow with CI/CD pipelines. And then once you click this button, it takes you to the editor. For jobs, we have yet another empty state. And by clicking on this button, you're taken to the editor again. But to me, it doesn't really make sense. Use jobs to automate your tasks, because a job, it's not a feature. A job, it's an object in CI/CD, and you only start interacting with jobs once you set up CI/CD, and jobs appear here in this list. So having a CTA here doesn't really make so much sense, because you're not setting up jobs. You're setting up CI/CD, so it would make sense to have like a single place for that. Then for artifacts, I guess it just doesn't show up when you don't have CI/CD set up, but it's something that I wanted to double check, because again, today was the first time I noticed artifacts in the navigation bar. And we have schedules, which just has this empty state, and it says no schedules. And even when you don't have CI/CD set up, you get a button to set up a schedule. Test cases, I'm not that familiar with this feature, but basically you can create a test case. I'm not that concerned about test cases. I think this empty state makes sense. But the point is, I think it's confusing for someone who's just getting started with CI/CD, and perhaps they know nothing about CI/CD, to go to the navigation and see all of these pages, and all of them have different empty states, and it's unclear where is the place where you go to actually set up CI/CD. So if you do click on the top level page, you're taken to the templates empty state. Great, because it offers the best experience, but maybe you will click through some of these other pages and then you skip that experience altogether. So my proposal, and this is just like an idea, and I want to look into all of those different pages and really understand if there's a use case to show them before you set up CI/CD. But my idea is to consolidate the pipelines, editor, jobs, and schedules page, or rather like hide them, and instead show a getting started page with the templates empty state. So it might look like something like this, where when you open the CI/CD navigation, you only get the get started link, which takes you to the templates empty state. And from there, you would be able to get started. And once you do get started, so you create your configuration file. And when you run your pipeline for the first time, like when you commit your config, that's when you create your first pipeline, and you create jobs as part of that pipeline. So that's when it makes sense to start showing the pipelines page and the jobs page, because we will have something to show there. Before you set up CI/CD, like one might argue, this is something that Dov mentioned, that, hey, having these links, it kind of gives you an idea for what GitLab CI/CD is made of. Like, hey, there's pipelines, and we also have an editor, and also pipelines are made of jobs. And we give some of that information in the empty states, but I think it creates more confusion and overwhelm rather than helping, because this information is spread over all of these different pages, and we're not taking the user through one single onboarding flow. So we don't make it easy for them to decide what the next step should be. Like here, what should be the next step for me? What should I click on to get started? So my question at this point, my main question is there a use case for keeping the schedules page, for example, always there, even when you don't have a CI/CD configuration? So you have a new project, you don't have CI/CD, and you just want to get started. Is there a use case where one would want to create a schedule before they have a config?
I couldn't think of anyone from the top of my head. So, but I really love your proposal, because you are, I think, absolutely right. And it's not just with your proposal. I'm also noticing this in other parts, that we sometimes do not allow users, like we don't purely focus on setting up something and start showing all the related elements, which kind of overwhelms, and it also like cognitively overloads them, and it affects their decision making strength as well.
And that is a really good point, because I'm not sure if you've seen that the pajamas, the foundations team is working on a KR about empty states in
Yeah.
Q3. So they're looking for this for specific scenarios, of course, but we need 2 empty states per category to help evaluate the existing designs and make sure, not make sure, and provide guidance on first-time users. And you mentioned a couple of times, right? Someone comes to this page and then that doesn't really relate to the empty state, doesn't relate to the action or to the context. So look into the KR and make sure that you are contributing to it so we can make these changes globally. And maybe you will find other scenarios that are similar in other product areas, like contributing to this KR.
Yeah, I was planning to reach out to them once I have like run the idea past you and have something concrete to show them. So I'll share the issue with them.
Yeah, they're looking for feedback. There's a thread in this epic, and then you just go there and then you show them the empty states. I think will be similar to what they did for the merge request widgets last quarter.
Okay. Should I move to my items? All right. The first thing that I wanted to share with everyone is a recent work that I'm doing, which is around linking pipelines by their names or commit names that they're related to, instead of making the ID clickable, because in a recent research that Nadia did, she also received this feedback. And plus I did something the previous year, and there were similar responses from users that these various digits that we show in relation to any resource when it comes to CI, they're not as helpful in identifying that resource. So for a job, we recently made this change where we started using the name of the job as the primary link to navigate to the job on the job index page. So we wanted to bring a similar change to the pipeline index page as well. And in this issue, I have added a design, but I would still share my screen to kind of pinpoint the strange challenges that I'm facing. So I'll first show like what kind of changes we made to the job index page. So just a second. Yeah, it used to be like we had this column that was mostly had the numbers to identify jobs as the primary, like the column before the name column, and names were actually placed somewhere down here after the stage. But it was a really good feedback that jobs are not a collective resource. They are singular. I mean, a pipeline is made up of many jobs, but a job in itself, they have their names. So why can't we just call them by their names? They're more recognizable that way. So this is how the change that we made. And we wanted to replicate that on the pipeline side, but it was not so easy. So this is how the pipeline page looks today. I hope I haven't done anything to this. And there's so much happening around that even when I decided to move a few things here and there, it was very challenging because something or the other was kind of taking a hit. But I started to notice like where are the places where probably we can save some real estate, like what are the things that are redundant in this context. For example, we always show the identity of the author of the commit or the MR to which the pipeline relates to, but is that as important? Because this is the pipeline index page, this is not the merge request index page. And we have this whole dedicated column for the triggerer, which is an important information, but can we somehow kind of move it, like assimilate into one of the other columns to make space. And after many hit and trials, I know this has a lot of links. I'll reduce the number of links here, but this is more or less the MVC layout that we might be going ahead with. I'm still awaiting some comments and some feedback on that in the issue. So what I did was I detached the name of the, sorry, this is the final one. Yeah. So I detached the name of the commit from, what just happened? Yeah, of the commit from the commit ID column. So this, before we had a dedicated column just to talk about the commit and the merge request. So we had the title of the commit, we had the ID for the merge request and commit ID as well. And that was like treated as a separate column. But I loaned some idea from the job index page as well. So in the job index page, we kind of mix stuff a lot. So we have the job ID, which is presented along with the commit ID. So I thought, why can't we take a similar approach? And it's still a leap. We need to validate this. But to make space and to make the context more stitched, I'm trying different combinations of clubbing data. And I mean, we can use the name of the commit separately as a name for the pipeline. And how this will come handy is the pipeline authoring team is working on a capability where users would get to name their pipelines, like they would get to put a name to the pipelines. And once they do that, that is going to override the commit name, which is shown here, or the merge event name for which the pipeline is running. And it would be much easier for them to identify that way. Yeah, I would love to hear some thoughts now.
I love this, Vitika. It's it's something that I'm trying to do with the environments page that also has a lot of information on the table. And I think you found really good inflection points, like the avatar and cutting down the name of the trigger to do that. So props for that. Sounds like really good work. Do you have in mind any mitigations for example, if a name was really large, or if you need to add even more information on the page, like where would you go? Or is this where you're stopping for now?
So I do have some ideas. I had a meeting with Nadia yesterday where we briefly discussed this, and that gave me some more ideas about what improvements we can make. So one problem that I still see us facing is, of course, what you just mentioned. Like, there is no room for anything else. Like, it's too packed. And we noticed that we are kind of communicating the status of the pipeline in many different ways. For example, let's look at the second one. It says running here. If you look at the mini pipeline graph, it is pretty apparent that yes, it is running. Then again, in the duration column, it tells you it's in progress. I mean, do we really have to reiterate the same thing so many times? So
Yeah.
the duration column is there to mostly state the duration, like for how long did the pipeline run? So if the pipeline is in progress, we probably don't even have to show that. So maybe this information that which finally appears, let's say these many minutes your pipeline ran for, that could appear somewhere in proximity to one of these status.
Yeah.
And above all, I think there is a possibility to actually merge these the status label and the mini pipeline graph altogether. And that would give us a really good and clean and breathing layout for the table.
Yeah, I like how you're naturally converging towards a more vertical layout, like stack information on top of each other. And at some point, like this stops being a table and starts being like rows of cards, one on top of each other. One interesting thing that I want to explore in environments is allowing users to expand or compress information. So depending on what we know about their use case and which information is important or not, we could provide a more streamlined view, and then they can expand either the whole page or row by row, like, okay, show me everything. And then we can just dump as much information as they want. But if we really know the use case and what information is important and what's a hierarchy, then we can provide a very streamlined experience that shows only what they need, and it's easy to read and easy to parse. But then we can users can expand that and see everything if they want to.
That's a great idea. Is by any chance, is there a solution validation that you plan to do for that?
So right now we're in problem validation to see like which direction we would like to go with that. But that's like
Okay.
the end goal that I have in mind, but it's still very early. So I don't have any documentation on that yet.
Okay.
But I'll keep you updated.
Yeah, I would love to be updated around that. I have kind of suggested here that since we are making some substantial changes, and I'm not very sure like how users would take it, because we are in fact basing, like we have data to support that yes, this is a valid problem, but we are still making some big changes, so we should validate it. And I have also created this issue, this new issue around the same thing that I just communicated, which was remove duplicate status indicators on the pipeline index page. So this is just a follow up. And because in pipeline execution, since we have again been focusing a lot on intradev reliability and availability, so that means our our backend capacity is almost kind of plugged. So we are mostly working on, as a designer, I'm mostly working on with front-end engineers to make the UI look better and improvements wherever we can. So
Yep.
it's a good time to look at such things.
Yeah. Vitika, reach out to Annabelle. I think she did some validation or did something similar in Secure about this this list view. And Daniel touched on my points, like how it is going to look like in different parts of the product, right? Because we reuse this table view and we mix and match this information everywhere. And one of the things, the first thing I thought when I saw you changing the information around or moving information around is like, ooh, I know that, like the release, when I was doing validation for release management, for example, there were so many of these non-technical personas that don't really understand the context of the pipeline or how the job is running, etc. But they look for the information, they scan the page and they, to understand this pipeline is detached or this pipeline is, etc. So it's good that you and Daniel mentioned the validation, because you might want to see how this type of change will affect all these different personas and how this can be replicated, you know, in other product areas. Because I from what I've seen, there'll be a huge impact in the cognitive load for people when we make this redesign. But I do agree that having an option to move things around or move to a second level in the list, expand, collapse something, we need to explore that. But a lot of personas. So this might be something that will require, cross collaboration, just to understand what are the other scenarios, you know, for the same views, for the views that we own. Let's say, yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Hayana, especially because even though even if Vitika finds the ideal solution for pipelines and I find the ideal solution for environments, I think most areas at some point will reach this threshold where there's just too much information for the table to hold. And then if each one of us invents a new pattern that goes in a different direction, then we're creating a new problem while solving each one of our own problems. So we should try to align on that for sure.
Yeah, I think this would be a good candidate for us to bring it to a higher level, like to pajamas, for example. Like right now we're empty states and we had a merge request, so lists, and we'll have the environments. We have so many of these kind of tabular views, but not, and this one in particular where we see replicated with information, right, is replicated in the merge requests view, the list page, and we have environments and we have pipelines. I think it's good to raise that flag, so we can also get their help to coordinate this across the board. So I don't know, maybe since you all working on it, wanna start the conversation, start discussion.
I wanted to ask if the pipeline name will link to the pipeline or the commit.
I think that was for you, Vitika. Did you get that?
Oh, no, I didn't get anything.
Does the name in the table, does it link to the pipeline?
For now it does, but I'm thinking to remove the link because there are just too many links. The status badge links to the pipeline, the name links to the pipeline. Maybe the number can be skipped.
I actually thought that the name is probably good to link to the pipeline, and I would remove the status badge instead. But again, this it's just an idea. But to me, it seems like if the name was all the way on the left, it would be a very clear CTA that this is the pipeline. So it's the pipeline name. You click on the pipeline name to view the pipeline, and then if you know to use the mini pipeline graph to go to specific jobs, you can use that. But also I'd be curious to see some information around the usage of items in the table. It could also be interesting, like how many people actually click on the status page, because it's not really, to me, it's a weird component, to be honest. It's like a button, but doesn't necessarily look exactly like all of our buttons, but it takes you to the pipeline.
Yeah, I had no idea people click on that, but in one of the studies that I conducted, everybody clicked on that button to go to the pipeline graph. And that's when I became aware that that is an option.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a room for a lot of improvements, and I'll definitely check in with all of you because this is an ongoing effort. I'm very sure like we'll keep on creating a follow-up after the other.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
so much.
no problem. Maybe I'm not sure if you heard, Vitika, if you had already dropped that we were discussing that this is a good candidate to bring to foundations team and also help them coordinate, how this list is being used by different personas in different product areas, so that we don't introduce different patterns for release and then for verify, but also learn how other people are consuming these lists and what's important for them in different contexts, not just in the verify or the release context.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I know that we very recently migrated this table, and we can definitely do some more improvements there. But going to the foundations is a good idea.
We are a bit over time, so I'm going to power through the testing and runner points. So Gina added here some amazing comments on the runner enterprise management scorecard that is in progress. So kudos to Vitika, that is being awesome and helping out. This part of the KR, one of the UX department KR for Q3. So Gina started looking into the jobs to be done, and we are helping set up a discussion guide. And she's also in the discussion, we started realizing that, okay, the jobs to be done for runner are, I'm sorry, but they're awful. So we have to rewrite them. And Gina started doing that as well for the runner admin views, and also project quality summary. So research is finished up last week. Also, thank you, Vitika, for helping out. And Gina is meeting with James, looking at the dovetail insights, and I know that she has a plan for learning more about the testing categories as part of her stage group onboarding. If you have any comments, Slack her so we can continue the conversation. And for package, not much going on there. So the stage group, they're working on the milestone deliverables plan, but I'll start working on the onboarding plan for Katie. So just if you're curious, her focus will be on the package metadata, dependency proxy UI, and perhaps package cleanup policies, and more to follow. She has start date. Not sure if I added this here last time. It said September 6th. So it starts on September 6th. 80. I know we are a bit over time. We don't have to discuss this now, but I've been thinking about reshaping the sessions a little bit. I think today was not not the time to do that because we did have very productive conversations. But I was thinking like every other month, do a mostly async or read-only agenda so that we can focus on what we did exactly today, talking about one problem per stage group and doing some sort of a design co-working session, but at the same time do some team building or icebreakers. I think this would also be interesting now that we have Gina. We're going to have Katie joining, and then we can spend 10-15 minutes at the end of the call. I don't know, I copied this from the ops leadership, but those are actually interesting. So they do GitLab cribs, walk around the house, play a game, or just do a trivia about yourself during the session so that we get to know each other. We've been here for a while, but we have new people. So let me know what you think, if you think that's a possibility, or if you have any thoughts or comments or how to shape this idea around our team building. Maybe. Any thoughts on that? Maybe you hate team building events. I also hate them, but I'm a manager.
No,
so
they
I have
can
to
be
say.
fun. So
I actually like these suggestions a lot.
Yeah. In pipeline execution, we did something. It was hilarious. Like it was a lot fun. We really enjoyed that.
So let's try it next time. I'll add here ahead of time to the agenda, or maybe pick something, put like a +1 here, and then we'll see which one will be next week. The one that gets the most votes. 1 vote? No. How many votes per person? How does it work? Like 2 votes, 3 votes per person?
I think 3 is good.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Right.
I have a lot of dead plants in the house, so I won't vote for the first one.
Vinica, just show us your your sad plant collection. Yeah. Or your games. Vitica always has so many boring games
Yes.
around. Have you actually played all of them, or are you just like a collector like I am? I buy books that I never read, or is it the real deal?
Because my husband is not around, so I can say the truth. I haven't played 50% of them.
Thank you. I'm not alone. We haven't played a bunch of games we got. It's just a coping mechanism at this point.
All the puzzles accumulated during the pandemic.
Whatever works.
But later, I want to see Daniel's manga collection. I wonder if it's only Naruto or is it more diversified?
It's only Naruto.
Ah, okay. All right. Then let's get back to it. I see the votes coming in. I'm also going to vote later and maybe ask Gina as well if she, if maybe there's something that we can do async. And then we'll make a decision in 2 weeks. We do something fun. Awesome. All right. And see you later. Bye, everyone.
See you later. Enjoy your
Bye.
day.
Thanks.